Good afternoon. I would like to introduce Stephen, who will be going through Power BI and Microsoft Dynamics NAV. I'm Andrew Good. I'm the moderator for this session. If you have questions, you can enter them in your dialog box, and I will watch for those. And as we get to the end of the session, Stephen will answer questions at that time. So if you have questions, then you can save them to the end of the presentation, and we can get into that after he's shown you the wonders of Power BI and the nuances of working with Power BI and NAV. Stephen?
Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening. So my name is Stephen Renders, and I will be presenting Power BI and Microsoft Dynamics NAV. All of the presentations, the PowerPoints, and the examples that I'm going to provide, I'm also going to make them available after the webinar, so you can download them. So let's get started with a small overview of what I'm going to try to put into 1 hour of time. So I'm going to start with an introduction where I'm going to introduce you to what is Power BI, what is business intelligence. And then I'm going to start by explaining how we can collect and prepare your data when you are given the task of building a dashboard. What we are going to have a look at are 2 different ways of doing it. The first one will be using the Power BI Designer, and the second one will be using Power Pivot and Power View. With both tools, we are going to follow the same kind of approach. So the first thing we are going to do is we will load our data. Then I'm going to explain you how we can also do some shaping and transforming of the data, how we can implement a time dimension in different ways. Of course, there are also other ways that you can select. Then how you can create relationships in your data model. And by using these relationships, we will enable the possibility for a drill down or to link or different parts of the reports. I'm also going to show you then how you can share the information and publish it, for example, to powerbi.com. But let's get started with the introduction of the course. I'll just go over to my full screen at the moment. So when we are going to create dashboards using Power BI or any other kind of tool that you will be using, dashboards sometimes misconcepted. It sounds sexy and cool to have, and in the business intelligence world, it's used a lot. It's actually what is a dashboard. But what we need to do when we are going to be building our dashboards is we need to show all the information which is required in a consolidated, simple, intuitive, and clear display. And although it might seem or sound easy, it's not always the case. We need to deliver the right information in an insightful way so that when someone is going to have a look at the dashboard, that they understand, that they know what it's all about. So a dashboard should explain itself. To present a little bit more information, and we're also going to use reports, ad hoc reports, static reports, and so on. We are also going to present the information role-tailored, meaning that we will fetch it from Dynamics NAV. Dynamics NAV is a role-tailored application, so by role-tailored I mean that we usually are going to create dashboards for different types of people in the organization. We'll also use KPIs or key performance indicators, which can be very simple. And the idea behind the KPI in our dashboards actually that will present information measures so that we know the state of certain things in the application. So this might be an example of a dashboard. And if you look at it more closely, you're going to notice that it's the dashboard for Microsoft Dynamics NAV on the powerbi.com website, which you can get out of the box for free. I'm also going to explain that later today. So starting from this dashboard, we get a general overview. We have some sales information, some financial information, a KPI, which might be a very simple number, for example. On each of these parts, we can then click and the detailed report will be opened. Now, how can we get started when we are confronted with the question to create such type of a dashboard? It all starts by collecting and preparing the data, and there is a functional part in here and a technical analysis that needs to happen. So how can we determine what information we would like to show in our dashboard and reports? Well, something that you need to know, and probably already do, is that the creator of a report isn't always able to determine alone what information to show. And depending on the type of user or the type of person who's creating the dashboard, you might be a technical person. You need to conduct an interview to talk with the business or the key user to be able to understand what information is exactly required. So it's very important to interview the business users, to involve them as soon as possible. And it's a circle that you're going to go through a couple of times. You can compare this a little bit, but when you're creating an RDLC report in the application, you will ask the user to create a sketch of how should it look like and what numbers do I need to show here and there. But it's actually similar, and we're going to be creating a dashboard. So how are we going to interview the business users? Which are the types of questions that we can ask? Well, the first thing that we need to know is what are the core numbers, the measures, the facts that you would like to have visualized in our dashboard. An example might be, I would like to see the overall revenue, the number of units sold, the usage of devices, items, the number of subscribers or customers. We need to be very clear what is a revenue, what is a unit, what is a device, a subscriber, and so on. Usually the management, when they will be using your dashboard, they would like to compare these figures with specific targets or budgets. On the short term, to be able to react immediately, but also on the long term, to be able to see trends and also predict problems or predict the future. So we need to try to take that into account when we are thinking about planning and creating our dashboards. The first question that you will ask yourself is what calculated fields would I like to see? Once we know which fields that we are going to fetch out of the database, sometimes in the data model or in the report, we might need to calculate some extra fields. So we need to know which ones need to be calculated and how they need to be calculated. Very important also is that we know which fields need to be presented on rows or columns and what type of layout and so on. And then where can I find the data to display the correct information. When data is coming from our Dynamics NAV database, we all know, for example, the description of an item can be found in the item table, but when we are going to be using ledger entry tables, we might also fetch a description or see one there. So which one do we require? And of course, we're also going to involve the business users in this process. The idea is that you start by creating an inventory of the metrics that you need to show in your reports or your dashboard, and maybe also an inventory of the other metrics that you require to be able to compare them with budgets or other figures. So examples of metrics might be the number of customers, the sum of the revenue, the sum of the units, and as you notice, I'm talking about counts or sums or aggregates actually. We might need to show the variance to target, the year-over-year growth as a percentage year-to-date. So these are examples. And we might need to drill down the information or visualize it by region, country, city, for example, product, time, by year, by month, by quarter. Then we also need to know, are we talking about the calendar year or the fiscal year, and which periods would we like to have available. So these are all metrics that we need to think about. And we need to also materialize that in our data model. Now, obtaining the data actually is going to be relatively easy. When we are working with Dynamics NAV and we have some old version of Navision, we can work with exported files and you can work with go directly to the database. But in our situation, we're not going to do that. We are going to use web services. As from NAV 2013, you can publish a page and or a query object in OData web service, and you can service them directly in the Power BI toolset. So that's also the approach that I'm going to follow. Furthermore, when we are going to build query objects, they're also going to be very fast on SQL Server. There are also other ways that we can use to fetch information from the database, but I will focus on web services. So I'm not going to give a detailed training on query objects. You might have already seen a query. If not, I can always send you a link to a more detailed training on queries. The advantage of using query object is that you can fetch information from one or even multiple tables. You can combine them. You can even join the tables using different SQL joins. You can pre-calculate sums. You can also do group bys. And from a performance point of view, it doesn't matter how many tables that you're going to put in here as data items, only one query will be sent to a SQL server. Also for performance, you can also add some extra indexes in your database if that's required. So we will use query objects. Once we have them, and we're going to publish them as OData web services. And you can do this very simply by going into the web services page in Dynamics NAV. Let me try to show that in the application. So I'm just going to go over here to a virtual machine. And in this virtual machine, I have my application. I also have the development environment. As you can see in our development environment, I have my query object, just going to take one into design. You notice that information from the item ledger entry table is combined with other tables. So you can construct your query object. Once it's ready, you can go to the web services page. You can add a new object in here. And as you notice, I've already published a number of query objects. To be able to use them as a data source, we need the URL. So what we can do is we can copy this cell, then you can test it just by pasting it in your browser. And if you see this kind of information, you know that it's working. And that URL is the one that we are going to remember to use in Power BI Desktop or the other tools. What you're going to notice is that you can combine page and query objects, although I have found out that sometimes, even when you publish a page here as an OData web service, you might not be able to use it as a source in Power BI Desktop or Power Pivot. That's why personally I prefer to work with query objects, but both of them are, of course, possible. What we're also going to see, but I'll come back to that later, is that by default, as from NAV 2016, there are a number of objects published by default as OData web service because they are used and serviced by the PowerBI.com dashboard for Dynamics NAV. Okay. So we have exported our data and we are now ready to start to build our report. I know I'm going fast, but it's a short session. So behind door number one, I have here Power BI Desktop, which is a tool that we can use. The other one is Power Pivot in Excel. But the advantage of Power BI Desktop is that you can download it for free from the Microsoft website. You can do everything in that tool without needing to have Excel installed on your machine. So it's a free tool and you can create your data model and create your dashboards. What you see right here is an example of such a dashboard created here in the Power BI Designer or Power BI Desktop. Now we are always going to follow a number of steps. So the first thing that we are going to do in a few moments is we are going to launch Power BI Desktop. And I'm going to demonstrate how you can use it to connect to a data source on a data web service. Then what you might need to do in order to transform or shape your data to make sure that your reports will be able to understand the fields correctly. Model your data and then create reports. So let me just go over here to the virtual machine. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start Power BI Desktop. What I'm also going to do here in the application is, for example, copy this URL again. And once my Power BI Desktop has been started, I'm going to use that as a data source. What you also see when you start the application, you get a small splash screen, which you'll find links to the blog and some videos explaining how you can get started. In order to import data from NAV, I'm going to use here OData feed as a data source. You can also notice that you can connect to multiple different sources. So you can go to an Excel file, a CSV file, and so on, SQL database. And depending on the version of Power BI Desktop that you are using, you're going to notice that many more become available. As you can see, I can even go to Facebook if I would like to create a dashboard on all of the likes I had on my latest status. Now, Power BI Desktop is under construction. What I mean is that you can already use the tool, it's ready, but Microsoft is also releasing every month new updates. In the latest release, at the end of March, there were a lot of really nice features which were added here in the application. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to connect here our data feeds, and in the window that opens I'm just going to paste the URL that I've copied, and I'm going to click on the OK button. It will now connect to Microsoft Dynamics NAV, and if it works I can see the information in here. If it doesn't, I might need to change the authentication method. Right now I'm using Windows authentication. If I click on the load button, the information will be imported in Power BI Desktop. I can always use the refresh button to refresh it later. While he's importing, he's actually executing the query, which is the OData web service, and in a few seconds I can see the results here on the right side, the fields which were imported. I'm going to go here into the data view to have a more detailed look on my data to see which columns were imported and if the system has recognized the correct data types. As you can see, I have two dates in here, my posting date and my shipment date, because I don't want to see any time information. It makes no sense. What I'm then going to do, for example, is a right click, or I'm going to use the modeling tool here on top to change the data type from text, for example, to date. Once I do that, then I can also select a format in the datetime format, depending how I would like this date to be visualized. I'm also going to do this for my shipment date, so I'm going to change it here to date, and I'm going to select a format in here, just so that you will see that all of the modifications that I'm doing here on my query are also logged here on the right side. In a few moments we will see that once I'm going to import my query. So what I'm then also going to make sure of is that my numerical fields are recognized as numbers. So I'm going to say here, and the data type is decimal. And then you're also going to notice that in here, and the system is then going to create a little sum, meaning that we will be able to use this as an aggregate field in the application. Imagine that we have a numerical field, for example, the shipment line number, which is a line number, and don't want any sum to be created for this. Well, I'm just going to leave it on text, and in that case, the system will not allow me, for example, to create the sum over the average of the line number. But the modifications that I'm doing right here are on the result of the query, but I can of course also edit my query to see what happens behind the scenes. A new window opens. This is actually the before part. So as you notice, I'm fetching my information here from the OData feed. Also in the query itself, I can already do some manipulations of my data. So I can also here select a column and do a transformation. For example, I can change the data type into decimal or into something else. In this case, it might be better if I select a date. What I can do in here, I can do some calculations on columns depending on the data type. I can also add columns. I can do a split. I can merge. I have a lot of possibilities which are similar than the ones that we have in integration services. Everything that we are doing, if I'm changing a type in here, or if I'm saying here the shipment line number is going to be a text field, well, all of the modifications that I am doing, let's say I'm going to remove this then, are also going to be logged here on the right side. So I started from my source, then I changed the type of some columns, and I removed a column. And as you can notice, each of these steps can also be undone, so that you know where you started from and all the modifications that you have added. Once you are happy with the result, what we can do then is we can click on the close and apply button, and all my modifications will be applied in this case and will be visible in the result. So just going to click on the button, and we can see that in here. Now what I have done, because I'm not going to do everything from scratch right now, is I have already prepared an example, a basic example with Power BI Desktop, in which I imported a number of OData web sources coming from Dynamics NAV. So what I have in here, if I go here to the data view, I have my customers, the invoices, I have the items and so on, and you can also notice that I have some numerical fields. Now let's say that I have my invoices, which is an invoices query. And in here I have a type field and a number field. And what I would like to do in here, if the type, for example, is a resource, I would like to link this to my resource table later. And if the type is item, then I would like to link it to the item table. The problem is that I cannot use this column because it contains both of the information. So what I did in this case is I created two extra columns, one which contains only the item number and the second one which only contains the resource number. I did that by using DAX, which is an expression language. And if you can read it, you can see that if the type fields from my invoices query here is item, then I'm going to use the number. And I have the same kind of query in here, but then the type should be resource. So this is actually a calculated column which I added into my data model. You can also see that by the different sign in here. So once I have done that, and I've also imported my other tables, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create my data model. So I can go here to the bottom. I can see the queries which I imported. I can see my invoices, and then starting from one of these, I can select the field, drag it to another table, and create a table relation. As you notice, I'm going to start here from my invoices. And I'm going to go to the other related information. So my invoices are actually my effects, my measures, which I would like to analyze. And I'm going to use the items, the customers, the resource, and so on to slice and dice my, my information. Why am I doing that? Well, because Power BI Desktop is going to use visual analysis to do it. I'm going to use drag and drop, and I'm going to try to discover patterns in here. And if I don't have a good data model with table relations in here, the system is not going to do that automatically. So let me just go over a couple of slides in here. And this is kind of a data model and that we are going to build. And the data model that we are going to build is going to follow the star schema, which is used a lot in BI. It means that I'm going to centralize my fact table, which is going to contain my measures, my numerical fields. And surrounding the fact table, I'm going to put my dimension tables like customer, item, time, and so on, which are actually the attributes that I'm going to use to give meaning to my measures. If you look at the data model, you're going to notice that our fact table will be here in the center, and surrounding it we'll have all of the other tables. So if you look at it from a little bit further distance, you're going to notice it looks a little bit like a star. Now what I also have in my example is that between customer and salesperson, there's also a relationship. So between your dimensional tables, you might have multiple links to be able to see the customers by salesperson or to do drill down. So if you do that with all of your dimensional tables, your star schema is going to start to resemble a snowflake. So that's why we have the snowflake schema and the star schema in BI, in the BI world. So it's the same kind of principle when using Power BI Desktop or Power View. Now what you can also do once you have your queries in here, you can also edit them again. So if I go back here to my query, open the query designer, for example, for my invoices, and all of the modifications that I have done will also be visible here on top of the field. It doesn't seem to want to resize, but if I open that, you can see all of the transformations also and that I have performed here in these steps. I can also go into the advanced editor if I would like to see the whole results, and here you can see the query language. There is also documentation available about that. You can directly write your query in here if you want to. You can also work with variables if you would like to go a little bit more advanced. And we only have 1 hour of time, but I wanted to show you that a lot is possible here in Power BI Designer. I also demonstrated how you can use DAX, the expression language, to add some calculated columns. Now, DAX is actually an enormously rich expression language. There are books about that with thousands of pages, and would really advise or recommend you to have a look at them. Okay, now once we have our information in Power BI, we're also going to visualize it. So that's step number 3. How are we going to do that? Well, what I'm going to do right here is I have a dashboard. which is the next step. So built on top of my previous dashboard where we had our tables and the relationships and some calculated fields. Now I will also create a dashboard. Now, before we can do that, what you're also going to see is that I added something else in my data model, which is a date table. So in order to be able to do time intelligence or to look at my data on a timeline, it's recommended to have a separate date dimension in your data model. What I did here in Power BI Desktop is I used a function to create a table with the name date. I add some columns, and then I'm going to use DAX expressions to determine which columns. The first one is my date column, from the starting till the ending date. Then I have some other columns based on this first one to have the date as an integer and so on. There are also other ways on doing that. This is just one example. And once we have our date table, I'm also going to use that in the relationships, and I'm going to make sure that, for example, from my fact table, there is a link to the date table. Okay, so we have our tables in here. We have the relationships. Step number 3 is then to create a report. Just going to click on the enable button in here. What I have in here is a very simple report. How can we do that? Well, basically, let me just create something new. We'll go here to invoices. You can see your fields. I'm going to select the sum of amounts. And then I'm going to very simply select the item number, and as you notice, the dashboard is being built. I can add something else in here. Let me take the sum of amount again, and then I'm going to use the customer or the type. In this case, I'm just selecting something. Once I have that in here, I can select another visualization. So as you notice, we have different ways on visualizing information. New ones are added every month, and they are really interesting to use. What you're also going to notice is that if you use them, if I click on one, the other one is also going to be updated, so they are related. So based on that, once you have your visualization in here, I should also mention you can change the sort by, you can even export information to Excel if you want to. Depending on the visualization that you have selected, you might get different properties. You can also play with these properties, add some filters in here. You can also drag your fields. There are a lot of possibilities. So I've prepared a report in here with 4 elements. I have in this case information from the invoice table. If you select the visualization, you can see here from which table or tables the data is coming from and which fields were selected. So if you look at the report that somebody else created, you can use this technique to reverse engineer it. In this case, I have some sales information. I have this kind of tile visualization on the tree map, which is a very nice one. So just some sales information. I also created here a sales dashboard, which is going to load, which I'm presenting in this case my customers on a map, a very powerful feature. I have my sum of amounts with information from the customer table, in this case the country region code, and it's recognized as a geographical information. So when you select it, you will usually automatically select the map in here. On the right side, I used some slicers, so you can select a field, for example, from one of your tables. In this case, I selected the salesperson name. Use the slicer visualization, so you can use that to filter your report. You can select one or multiple, depending if you use Control or Shift, or you can just remove your selection. What I've also done is then a third one, item sales and profits. And then you can even go a step further. You can also import visualizations that you can find. You can create them yourself, or you can download them from the Power BI website or blog. All that you need to do, or need to know when you would like to create your own visualizations, is a little bit of HTML5 and JavaScript, which is not my specialty, but you can create your own visualizations. So I have an example on that in here. What I have here is my aquarium or my fish tank, in which I can see my customers, and the red customer is this one. The green customer, I can't really pronounce the name, but these are customers coming from my Cronus database. And a big customer with a great sum amount in this case is a big fish. And then I also have my small customers. So it's a way on visualizing your information. It demonstrates a little bit on how far you can go with these custom visualizations. I like that one a lot personally. So using these visualizations, there's also timeline, word clouds, super bubbles, calendars, and so on. I will also share them with you. I've prepared a number of these visualizations which I downloaded. There are a lot of them. The Sandance is actually new since the latest release, and it's a very interesting one. I don't know exactly if I still have the link open. But if you go, for example, to the Power BI website and you go into learning or the blog, it should be in here somewhere, the blog, voilà, there it was, then you can get up to speed with what Microsoft has released. And the Sandance, I think, was released here in the March update. And you can also, I think, find a link in here, if I remember correctly, to more information about the Sandance visualization. So I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit, and this is an example of the Sandance. You can do a lot of that. There's also a sample file that you can download. There is also a website that you can go here, sandance.ms. I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds to open. Okay, and then in a few seconds we should see a nice example coming up. Although it takes a little bit too long, maybe I will come back to that later. Just wanted to show it to you. It's really a nice one to use. Let's have a look if I can open that locally in my browser. That might be a little bit quicker than on the Hyper-V. So I'm just going to the website. Bear with me a few seconds. It's loading. Voilà. So this is something that you can also do with the Sandance. You can do that if you have a lot of information to show. It's a really nice visualization, which is now in the March update of Power BI. Okay, but I'm going a little bit off topic right now. So you can visualize your data in Power BI. The next step is then we would like to share the information with our colleagues within the company. We can do that internally. We can pass around the Power BI file, or you can publish it, for example, to powerbi.com. You can create a free profile on powerbi.com using your live ID. I think you can use up to 10 gigabytes per person for the free version. There are also alternatives that you can buy. A paying version of powerbi.com, on which you can then publish your dashboard. You can share it with your colleagues. You can also implement security, who can read what, and so on and so on. So powerbi.com is then the place where you can go to upload your file and share it with your colleagues. Once you have your data on there, you can also download completely free and the Power BI app for your Windows phone, for your Android phone or iPhone, on which you can also see your dashboards, create tiles, interact favorites, set alerts, share, annotate, everything that you can do, even scan QR codes if you would like to. Depending on your operating system, you might have more or less possibilities. I think at the moment on the iPhone there are a few more options available. And so besides the NAV app, which you can have on your mobile device, you can also now have the Power BI app, and you have all in one place. Especially for management, this can be really interesting. So that was a quick view behind door number 1. And we also have, of course, door number 2 to have a look at, which is Power Pivot and Power View. Now, Power Pivot and Power View can be used to create a dashboard, which looks a little bit like this one. So we will start with Excel. You can use Excel 2013, 2016. I think it's even supported in 2010. And my slides have some detailed information. These are free add-ins that you have available in Excel, but it depends a little bit on the version of Excel. So they need to be, I think, at least on the Pro Plus version. We will follow the same steps. So we will connect to our data feeds from NAV, import the data, create our relationships, also use DAX, add some extra properties in Power Pivot, and then we can also create our dashboards. Now, how does that work? Let me just go over to the Hyper-V again. So I'm just going to close this. I'm not going to save any modifications. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to start Excel. Now remember, you still have the same URL that we have copied from NAV. And once Excel in this case is opened, I think it might take 1 or 2 seconds in here. Unless there are any issues as we see right now. What we are going to use in Excel, basically, let me do that, is the Power Pivot add-in. Now, Power Pivot is an add-in that you can also enable in Excel. In 2016, it should be there by default. In previous versions, you might first need to enable or download it yourself. And Power Pivot is actually a layer on top of Excel, in which we will create our data model. So I'm just going to go here to Excel. If it's enabled, you will see it here in the ribbon. If it's not enabled, don't worry, you can do that yourself. You can, for example, go anywhere in the ribbon. Let me go to Home here, for example. You can right-click, go to Customize. Then here in Customize, you can go into your add-ins. And in the add-ins in here, if you would just would like to refresh, which is not doing at the moment, you can see if the add-in has been enabled, yes or no. If not, then you can go here to the COM add-ins, just open them, and then you can enable all of the Power add-ins, Power Pivot, Power View, which we use for reporting, Power Map, which is a little bit out of scope for this course. Once you have Power Pivot in here, you can then click on the Manage button to open it. And Power Pivot is a tool which we will build our data model. It's very powerful. It also supports DAX, and it can work in theory with millions of rows in a very, very fast way. That's why we have Power Pivot, and that's why we're not doing it directly in Excel itself. Well, apparently, it's taking a couple of seconds to open. Once it's opened, I'm just going to go into the menu and I'm going to import my data from Dynamics NAV. Just taking a long time, so in the meantime, what I'm going to do in order not to wait too long is I'm just going to go here locally, because I also prepared that locally, and I'm going to show it there. So it will probably be a little bit faster. Okay, so I have Excel in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Power Pivot and click on Manage. Don't mind this information, I will come back to that a little bit later. So Power Pivot is opening. And in a few seconds I'm also going to import my, my data in here. Okay. So the first thing that I will do is I'm going to fetch information from no data feeds. Just going to open that, and in here you can paste the URL, the link to your query, your page web service from Dynamics NAV. Once you have that in here, you can click on Next and Continue, and the information will be imported in Power Pivot. Similarly then with Power BI Designer, and you can also go in here on your different columns, and there in the formatting you can say it's a text, date, or a decimal number, and how should it be formatted. So all of these steps are also available in here. You can also have a look here in the design menu. You can use functions to create columns. So if I go here to the end, I have done the same thing that in Power BI Desktop. I have my item number and the resource number, and I'm using the same DAX formula to calculate them. So it's almost completely the same than in Power BI Desktop. Then what I'm going to do, if I go back to Home, I can go here into the diagram view. And if I do that, you can see all the different tables that you have imported. And from within here, you can also create your table evaluations. If you right-click on one, you can change it. Or if you hover on one, you're going to notice with the green bars which fields are connected. So it's the same principle that we are going to apply in here. Now, as you can see, I also have a date dimension in here. How did I create that? Well, basically, I started from Excel. I typed in one date in here, the 1st of January. Then using my advanced Excel knowledge, I dragged it down until I had a lot of dates. Then I selected my column, formatted it as a table, and then I just selected the Add to Model button, which then actually added it to my Power Pivot model. In Power Pivot, what I then ended up with was my date dimension with only one column. And based on that first column, I calculated all of the other ones. So I am selecting the year of my date fields, the month, which is a function, the day, and the weekday, month name. I'm using a switch in here, which is like a case in NAV. So as you notice, I'm using some very simple DEX expressions to create these calculated columns in my table. Once I have done that, I also went into design and I marked this as my date table. So if you do that in Power Pivot knows which table is the date table, and it will also help you when you will be creating reports in Power View. There are other ways on creating date tables. You can even import them if you want to. So if you go, for example, to the Microsoft Azure Marketplace, you can also find some free web services that you can use as a data source. So now I have my data model here in Power Pivot. I have my table relations, I have my calculated fields, and so on. When I'm ready with that, then I can close Power Pivot, and I'm going to create my report. So let me just do that, and I have another example I've prepared that I can show you, which is the S2 one, which is the same data model, but with already a report in here. So it's opening Power View. Now what's the difference between Power View and the reports that we create in Power BI Designer? Well, Power View is based on Silverlight. So you might need to enable and install Silverlight, while Power BI Designer or desktop is based on HTML5. That's also the reason why the Power View button, which you should normally find here in the Insert menu, is not enabled anymore in NAV 2016. If it's not, you can add it manually, but I think Microsoft prefers is not to work anymore with Power View, but to use Power BI Designer instead. Anyway, I used Power View, I clicked on the button, a new sheet was opened. I can see my data model here on the right side. If I open it, then I can also just create a report. So how does that work? I'm just going to create a new sheet, select Power View. My data model is loaded. I can select one or multiple fields in here. And then the more I select, the more data I see. First, it's in a table layout, and then I can choose a visualization here on the left side. We have many different types of visualizations that we can select. So for example, if I will take the quantity, and then I'm going to take the city, in this case from my customer table, I can also present the information on a map, and the data is loaded automatically. As you can see, both of them are also connected. If we click on the one, the other one will be updated. So I created a similar type of dashboard in here with the timeline and my salespersons and so on, and some filters. I don't want to go too much into detail, but you can create your report using Power View based on top of your Power Pivot data model. Okay, so I also summarized that a little bit here in my slides. Different data sources which are supported, how you can create your relationships and even edit them in Power View. I should also mention that when we are going to use data in Power View, that our columns are strongly typed, which means that every column needs to have a data type defined, so we need to verify if it's correct. All values in one column, of course, have the same data type. There are some restrictions. We cannot do a sum on text data, so make sure that your decimal fields from NAV are recognized as decimal in Power Pivot, and check the correctness of your columns and change the format if you want to. You can do it here in Power Pivot, or you can override that maybe later in a later step. Creating a date table, I also summarized the steps in here. Started with one date, added more dates, added it to the data model, marked as a date table, and then derived the other fields using DEX. What I didn't mention is that you can also set your sorting order, especially if you're going to be working with extra columns in your date table, to make sure that your dates are sorted in the correct order. Okay. Then I can enrich the data model with DEX also in Power Pivot. I also demonstrated that. In your data model, when you select a column or a field in Power Pivot, you can also right-click on it and hide it from the client tools. It's an interesting feature because sometimes we need a column to be able to create a table relation, but we don't want the user to see that when he or she is creating a report. So you can very simply hide that. You can do it with one column, or you can do that with a complete table even. Now, if you're going to work with time calculations, there are a number of recommendations that I would like to stress. The first one is never use a date column from a fact table. I mean, don't use the posting date from the invoice table, for example. We need a separate date table. One reason is that, for example, in our invoices table, we might not have an invoice on the 3rd of January, so that date will be missing if you use it as a date table. If you use a separate date table, you will be sure that you'll be having a continuous date range. Create relationships between the fact tables and the date table. The date column in your date dimension should be the lowest, the day should be the lowest granularity. So we cannot go lower than a day. That's a recommendation. Also mark it as a date table in Power Pivot. You will get better calculations. In Power View, you can get started using Excel. You need at least Office Professional plus Office 365 and so on. And in Excel 2013, you can enable it. Sometimes the Power View icon is grayed out. It depends a little bit on your add-ins, which I've also demonstrated. Now, in Power Pivot, you can use different types of visualizations. I only demonstrate a couple of them. There are many more, and here in the presentation, which I will also share with you afterwards, I have hidden some slides which go into detail on each of these with some recommendations on which properties to set to get a better visualization. So have a look at that if you're going to get started with Power Pivot. What we can also do is we can select some default aggregations from a table or some default fields, which means that if we go into Excel, let's have a look if it is already open. So I'm just going to go back here. If I go into my sheet, you will notice that if I double click on my customer table, it's going to add some fields automatically, but not all of them. Why? Because only these 4 fields I have marked as being the default fields for that table in my Power Pivot data model. So what you do in your data model will change your experience here in the designer. So have a look at that. And the default fields for a table, for example. You can also set some default aggregations. You have the summarize by button on top, so it should be by default summarized as an average, so you don't have to do it manually when you're creating the report. And also have some examples on what happens when you hide a table from a client view or the client tools, and what happens when you hide these fields from the client tools. The idea is to make it as easy as possible for the non-technical end user who might be creating a report. Okay, what do we do right now? And we have Power Pivot, so we close Power Pivot, we save the Excel file. Then you can upload your Excel file to powerbi.com if you want to. But what you can also do, and I like that a lot, is you can save your Excel file, and then you can start up the Power BI Designer, the Power BI Desktop, and just import it. And Power BI Desktop will not only import your data, but also the complete data model, the relationships, and all of the reports in Power View, and they will be converted into reports in the Power BI Designer. Be careful, you need to use the import function. So from the menu, import, if you use the button on top, then it will only import the data. So really go to the menu, import, and then your Excel workbook and the complete data model is also going to be imported. So that's one way that I prefer to work, do the difficult stuff in Power Pivot, and then import it into Power BI Desktop and there create my reports and do the other stuff, for example. And that might be a possible approach. Okay, now of course you don't have to get started from scratch, and there is already the performance dashboard available on the powerbi.com website. What you can do via a number of mouse clicks in about 5 minutes is create this dashboard on powerbi.com, which will connect to your server, your Dynamics NAV server, fetch the data and create the dashboard. Once you have that, you can have a look at how it works. And even on powerbi.com, you can also have a look at your dashboards and your reports. You can change them, edit them, you can completely modify them or reverse engineer these reports. Now, how does that work? Basically, what we need to know is that if you go into powerbi.com, so let's have a look. I should have that prepared in here. So let's say I am here on powerbi.com. I'm going to click here on the Get Data button. I can get data from files, I can go to a database, I can fetch data from my organization, maybe someone else has prepared a content pack which I can just then use, or I'm going to click here on Get Service. As you notice, there are a lot of services that we can use, or connectors, and here is the one for Dynamics NAV. If you select that, you can connect to Dynamics NAV, and in this window, then we need to paste a URL. Which one do I need to use? Well, it's actually very simple. If I go back to the application in here, just going to copy this part. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to paste that in Notepad. So let me show that to you. Basically, this is what I copied. I'm just going to remove the last part, and this is what we need. So the link to our server, then the service tier or data, and then the company. When you copy that, you can then paste that, for example, here on powerbi.com when we are creating our connection. I was in here. Okay, so I'm just going to paste that, and the system is then going to connect. How is that possible? And you might wonder, how is it possible that from powerbi.com or even from my Hyper-V in Azure is able to connect to my data source, which is, for example, on my local machine or somewhere else? Well, basically what I'm using is the Power BI Gateway. So the Power BI Gateway is a software that you can download for free. There is a free version and a paying version. The paying one has more possibilities. Let's say I download the Power BI Gateway on my laptop, I install it. Well, then from powerbi.com you'll be able to find my laptop without the requirement of needing to have a fixed IP address, for example. So it's a gateway towards my data source. By doing that, I can use Windows authentication from powerbi.com to connect to any machine. Just going to click here on Sign In. And then the system is going to connect to my my data. Now, of course, here on my Hyper-V, I'm using a different login. So in that case, it doesn't work. But if I do that, for example, from here, let me go to powerbi.com. And I'm just going to log in again. So sign in. What I'm going to use right now are my credentials. You remember them. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to get data, services, Dynamics NAV, because I just want to prove that it works. I'm just going to paste the same URL, going to click on next. I'm going to select Windows Authentication, and you should be able to authenticate and fetch the information. Of course, Murphy's Law doesn't want to do that. Well, that's because I used the incorrect URL. Okay, let me give it one last try. You just bear with me 2 seconds. What I'm going to do right now is I'm launching Dynamics NAV locally. And because I need my local application, let me go to the web services. This is my local on my Think About That machine, which is my laptop. Just going to copy that URL. Let me paste that in here without the last part. Let me just copy that. And now I should be able to go here. Is powerbi.com, Dynamics NAV, connect. I will paste that URL. Click on the next button, use Windows Authentication. And I should be able to connect because I have the Power BI Gateway running locally. So it has already connected. I'm going to select Windows Authentication. And in a few seconds you can see, okay, the data is importing from my local database on the powerbi.com website. As you notice, I have already done that. So this is the new one which is created with the star. This is the old one that I have already imported. It takes a couple of seconds, then you get this dashboard. What you can do with this dashboard is you can click on each of these reports and to see the underlying information. You can even go to Edit Report and you get a complete designer. So you don't even need to have Power BI Desktop installed. You can create everything from scratch also in here. You can see your data model, you can see your visualizations, and most of the possibilities that you have in Power BI Desktop. Okay, so he has imported everything. You can see my shapes, you can see my interactions, and so on. I can save my modifications in the same report as a new report. And you can see your dashboard, you can see the individual reports in here. You can even see the data sets here at the bottom. So if I go into the data sets, I can also have a look here into the settings. I can now also click on Analyze in Excel. And the Analyze in Excel option has been added in the March update of PowerBI.com, allowing me to create an Excel file and to analyze my data in Excel. So we can go back to Excel, for example, which is a very nice feature. Let me just go again, or go back here to my dashboards. So if I go here into the settings, you can also have a look at the data sets. If the gateway connection is running, yes or no, with credentials that you are using. And you can even enable a refresh. So you can have your dashboard refreshed automatically. Now, using the free version of the gateway, you can only do that, I think, once or twice a day. With the paying version, you can do that more frequently. So it's a short introduction here on how you can get that dashboard up and running. I have a more detailed explanation also on my blog. So very easy to set up, to create, and then you can have your sales and finance dashboard out of the box. Now, to be able to make that work, you also should know that in Dynamics NAV, by default, we have a number of query objects which are published as from NAV 2016. These are the ones that the system is using. You might need to do a little bit of a setup for some for certain parts of the dashboard, but it should be working out of the box. You can even get it to work with NAV 2015. It's backwards compatible with that version too. So it only takes about 5 minutes, if all goes well, to set it up. And here we can see, for example, the account schedules. You might need to set them up because they are used in certain parts of the dashboards. Okay, so that's the Power BI content pack for Microsoft Dynamics NAV. Of course, you can also create your own content packs on powerbi.com. It's time for a number of conclusions right now. So there are different approaches. The first one that you can do, for example, is you can get started with Power Pivot. Once you have everything or data model ready in Power Pivot, you can import that into Power BI Desktop, finalize it, create your reports, and then upload it to powerbi.com to share it with your colleagues. Another possibility would be to start from Power BI Desktop, as I did in the beginning, and then upload that to powerbi.com, or immediately upload your Power Pivot data model to powerbi.com. Or another option might be, okay, I'm not going to do anything locally, I'm just going to go to powerbi.com and create everything online. So there are different approaches that you can use. At the moment, I would say maybe this one is the one preferred by Microsoft. It depends a little bit on what exactly you would like to do. Use Power BI Desktop, use the latest version. You can really do a lot of data modeling in there, shaping, transforming, and also reporting. And you can upload that to powerbi.com, implement some security, and share your data. If you can't get there with Power BI Desktop, then maybe you can use this approach, Power Pivot, and then open it in Power BI Desktop and go to powerbi.com. But there are different approaches possible. It depends also what you would like to do. Are you a user who is at the moment doing everything in Excel, creating some reports? Okay, then I will use Power BI Desktop or Power Pivot and then do it in the same way, but with a new data model and visualizations. Or do you have to create dashboards for the complete organization? Do you need separate data warehouse? Well, the architecture then is a little bit different, as you can see. And Power BI Desktop and Power Pivot can also go to analysis sources or to cubes, of course. So there are different approaches. I know it was a lot of information for only a short presentation, but if you would like to learn a little bit more, I would really recommend you to have a look at the Power BI website and the blog, especially on the blog for the latest information. And there was also a conference very recently where you can also review that. There was a BI blog, the Great Power Pivot FAQ, and one I really like a lot is about design patterns, not the Dynamics NAV design patterns, but the DAX design patterns. It's hosted by a number of MVPs that are known worldwide in the BI world. two Italian guys, and on their blog you can find some patterns. For example, how can I create time intelligence, how can I do this, how can I do that, how should I create my data model, for example, in Power Pivot. You can even download some examples in there. They also have a very good book on DEX, which I'm almost halfway in that at the moment. I would also like to introduce you to Platan.tv, where we're also going to create a number of videos. Now, I know it has been a lot of information. You probably are having a number of questions. So what I propose is that we try to answer a number of those questions at the moment. And if we don't have enough time, or if you can't figure out your question at the moment, and we'll also be happy to answer that afterwards on my blog, for example.
Okay, Stephen, we do have one question that came in a few minutes ago. And
Okay.
The question is from Renato: is the authentication method related to credential type in service administration?
Yes. So, for example, what I'm going to do here from Dynamics NAV, if I'm going to connect, is going to connect to your service tier. So you need to use the same kind of authentication that your service tier is supporting. Of course, you can also set up different service tiers with different types of authentication. So one for Windows, one for username, password, and so on. But yes, it needs to be the same kind of authentication.
And if anyone else has okay, we have another question that's just come in. It's from Daniel. Can you show more about PowerBI.com and the Cortana questioning?
Yes, I can do that. Now, the Cortana question, I haven't played with that a lot, but I think the idea is that, for example, if you have a look here at your dashboard, there is the Q&A. It has been there for a long time, also in Power Pivot and Power View. And in the Q&A, you can type in your question. For example, show me the sales or sales by this or by that. And depending on what you're going to type, and depending on how you have created your data model, the system is going to recognize these words and is going to create your dashboard, sales by salesperson name, for example. And I think Cortana is very similarly, but then you don't have to type, you can just speak. Create a dashboard and show me sales versus profit or compared with budget on a timeline, and after you have spoken your sentence, your dashboard will be created for you. That's the idea behind it. Also, just would like to mention a little bit to make that work better. You can also go here into a Power Pivot. And if you go into your data model, for example, you can have a look at your tables. It's still loading it at the moment. In the advanced, you can set up synonyms. So for each of the table names and each of the fields in different languages, you can set up synonyms so that these are recognized when you are typing in something or speaking in Cortana on the website. So using Power Pivot, you can make that work a little bit better. Don't know if that answers the question.
Okay, we haven't had any more questions. If you do have questions, please type them in the question box. We'll wrap up in the next 1 to 2 minutes. Okay, Sven has your hand is raised. If you'd like to type in a question, please do that. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. And thanks to Stephen for walking us through Power BI and the nuances of using Power BI with NAV. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Stephen, as we wrap up?
Well, I would like to thank everybody to have followed the webinar. I hope that you learned something. I was able to give you a little bit of an insight, or so that you can see the trees in the forest a little bit better, as we say here in Belgium. And if you have any questions, you can just send them or maybe to NavSkills or to Mark or to me, and then we'll try to answer them as soon as possible. I'm also going to share the PowerPoint and the examples. And I think that's it.
Okay, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day.